The sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Salida, Colorado, as Theresa Vale clutched the wrinkled letter in her trembling hands. Her husband's final goodbye, written in hasty scrawl with no remorse, left her standing alone at the stagecoach stop with nothing but a small carpet bag and the clothes on her back. 6 months into their new life out west, John Vale had taken what little money they had and disappeared with a saloon girl, leaving Theresa stranded in a town where she knew no one and had nowhere to go. It was 1876, and Salida was still finding its footing as a settlement along the Arkansas River. The railroad had only recently connected this mountain town to the rest of Colorado, bringing with it promise and peril in equal measure. For Theresa, a 22-year-old woman who had left her family back in Pennsylvania to follow her husband's dreams of Western prosperity, that promise had shattered like glass beneath her feet. "Madam, stage is leaving. You getting on or staying?" The driver looked down at her impatiently from his perch. Theresa stared at the departing coach, knowing she didn't have enough money for even a one-way ticket to anywhere. "I'm staying," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. As the stagecoach rolled away in a cloud of dust, Theresa turned toward the town, the weight of her circumstances pressing down upon her shoulders. The mountains loomed in the distance, beautiful but indifferent to her plight. She had exactly $2.16 to her name. Not enough for a room, barely enough for food. The main street bustled with activity, miners, traders, and townspeople going about their day. Theresa straightened her back and lifted her chin, determined not to show her desperation as she walked toward the town's small hotel. Perhaps they would have work for a woman willing to clean or cook. 3 hours later, Theresa sat on a bench outside the general store, fighting back tears. The hotel had no positions available. Neither did the restaurant, the laundry, or the dressmaker's shop. No one seemed eager to hire a newcomer with no references, especially a woman whose husband had just abandoned her. News traveled quickly in small towns. "You look like you could use something to eat," a deep voice said. Theresa looked up to see a tall man standing before her. He wore a dusty hat pulled low over his eyes, a faded blue shirt, and well-worn leather chaps. Unlike most men in town, he wasn't leering at her but instead held out a wrapped parcel that smelled of fresh bread. "I don't accept charity," she said automatically, though her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Not charity, just one neighbor helping another." When she hesitated, he added, "Name's Quinn McAlister. I own the Silver Spur Ranch just outside town." "And you look like you've had a hard day." After a moment's hesitation, Theresa accepted the package. "Theresa Vale. And yes, I have." "New in town?" Quinn asked, settling on the bench beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. 6 months, she replied, carefully unwrapping the bread and finding a slice of cheese tucked inside. "My husband brought us here for opportunities. Now he's gone and I'm—" She trailed off, unwilling to fully admit her desperate situation to a stranger. Quinn nodded, understanding filling his gray eyes. "Left you stranded, did he?" Theresa nodded, surprised by his perception. "How did you know?" "Happened to be at the stage stop this morning. Overheard some talk." He looked away, giving her a moment of privacy as she took a grateful bite of food. "I'm looking for help at my ranch. Cook just left to care for her ailing sister in Denver. Pays fair, includes room and board." Theresa stiffened. She'd already received several indecent proposals that day from men who saw a vulnerable woman and thought to take advantage. "I'm not interested in that kind of arrangement." Quinn stood up, tipping his hat respectfully. "Madam, I'm offering legitimate work. I have a foreman, 2 ranch hands, and myself to feed. We need someone who can cook, help with keeping the house, maybe tend the kitchen garden. Nothing more expected. Why would you offer work to a complete stranger? Theresa asked, suspicion edging her voice. Because everyone deserves a chance, he answered simply. And good help is hard to find. If you're interested, I'm heading back at sundown. You're welcome to ride out with me. With that, he nodded and walked away, boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Theresa watched him go, weighing her options. She had nowhere to sleep that night and would soon have no money for food. The possibility of work, real work with shelter included, was more than she had dared hope for. As the sun began to sink behind the mountains, casting the town in golden light, Theresa made her decision. She gathered her meager belongings and walked toward the livery stable where Quinn had said he would be. He looked up from saddling his horse, nodding when he saw her. "You decided to take the position," he stated rather than asked. "For now," Theresa clarified, "until I can earn enough to move on." Quinn helped her onto his wagon, which was loaded with supplies from town. Fair enough. He climbed up beside her, keeping a gentleman's distance between them. Ranch is about 5 miles out. Should be there before full dark. The ride was mostly silent. Theresa studied the landscape as they left town behind rolling hills covered in sage and scrub brush, mountains rising majestically in the distance. When they crested a rise, Quinn pointed ahead to a sprawling property nestled in a verdant valley. "That's the Silver Spur," he said, a note of pride in his voice. Theresa could make out a large main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Fields stretched beyond, with cattle dotting the landscape and a creek cutting a silver ribbon through the property. It was far more substantial than she had expected. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "Been working it for 7 years now," Quinn replied. "Started with almost nothing. Just me and my brother Patrick. He passed 3 years back, pneumonia took him fast. Been running it alone since." "I'm sorry for your loss," Theresa said, struck by the matter-of-fact way he spoke of tragedy. Quinn nodded acknowledgement as he guided the horses down toward the ranch. "Life out here takes as much as it gives, Mrs. Vale." "Miss Vale now, I suppose," she corrected him, the reality of her situation still raw. As they pulled up to the main house, 2 men emerged from the barn. Quinn introduced them as Hank, the foreman, a weathered man in his 50s, and Miguel, a young ranch hand. Both tipped their hats respectfully but eyed Theresa with curiosity. "Miss Vale will be taking over cooking duties," Quinn explained. "She'll be staying in the room off the kitchen." Hank's expression brightened considerably. "Thank the Lord. I've been doing the cooking since Mabel left, and these boys have been suffering for it. Can't get worse than Hank's biscuits," Miguel added with a grin. "Hard enough to break a tooth." Quinn showed Theresa to her quarters, a simple but clean room with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the kitchen garden. It was modest, but it was more than she'd had hours earlier. "Kitchen stocked," Quinn said, standing in the doorway. "Breakfast is usually at sunrise before the men head out. I'll leave you to get settled." Theresa set her bag down, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. "Mr. McAlister," she called as he turned to leave. "Thank you for the opportunity. I promise I won't disappoint you." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Everyone deserves a chance to start over, Miss Vale. Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, Theresa stared at the ceiling and thought about how quickly life could change. Yesterday, she had been a wife, albeit an unhappy one. Today, she was abandoned, alone, and at the mercy of a stranger's kindness. Quinn McAlister seemed decent enough, but experience had taught her that appearances could be deceiving. John had seemed decent once too. Before sleep claimed her, Theresa made a promise to herself. She would work hard, save every penny, and never again put her fate in a man's hands. This arrangement was temporary, a stepping stone to independence. Nothing more. Dawn came with the crowing of a rooster and the sound of movement in the kitchen. Theresa dressed quickly in her plain blue dress, one of only two she owned, and hurried out to find Quinn already stoking the stove. "I would have done that," she said, embarrassed to be caught sleeping in. "First day," he shrugged. "Figured you could use the extra sleep." He pointed to a large coffee pot. "Men will be in soon. They're partial to eggs and bacon if we have it. Biscuits too, though they've learned not to expect much there." Theresa rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time Hank and Miguel came in, along with another ranch hand named Davis she hadn't met the night before, she had a hearty breakfast waiting. The men ate with appreciation, complimenting her cooking between bites. "This is what food is supposed to taste like," Davis declared, reaching for another biscuit. Quinn ate quietly, observing more than participating in the conversation. When the men had finished and headed out to begin their day's work, he lingered. "I'll be out with the herd today," he said. "Should be back by sundown. Feel free to familiarize yourself with the house. There's a list of supplies in the pantry. Anything we're short on, just let me know." "Is there anything specific you'd like for supper?" Theresa asked, already planning the day's tasks. "Whatever you fix will be fine," he answered. "Been a while since we had a woman's touch around here. Anything will be an improvement over our cooking." After Quinn left, Theresa explored the house. It was larger than it had appeared from outside. 6 bedrooms upstairs, though only Quinn's showed signs of use. A study filled with books, a formal dining room, and a comfortable sitting room with well-worn furniture. Everything was clean but sparse, lacking the feminine touches that would make a house a home. In the kitchen garden, she found vegetables ready for harvesting: tomatoes, beans, and squash growing in neat rows. Herbs bordered the beds, their fragrance rising in the morning heat. Nearby, a chicken coop housed a dozen hens, providing a steady supply of fresh eggs. As she worked through the day cleaning, cooking, and taking inventory of supplies, Theresa found herself relaxing into the routine. The isolation of the ranch meant safety from prying eyes and whispers that had followed her in town. Here, she could work and plan her future without judgment. By the time the men returned that evening, she had prepared a substantial meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from the garden. The appreciation on their tired faces as they sat down to eat gave her a sense of satisfaction she hadn't felt in months. "You've outdone yourself, Miss Vale," Hank said, helping himself to seconds. Quinn nodded agreement. "Best meal I've had in a long time." Later, as Theresa washed the dishes, Quinn brought in a ledger and sat at the kitchen table. "Need to sort out your wages," he said, opening the book. $5 a week plus room and board. That sound fair?" Theresa nearly dropped the plate she was drying. It was more than fair, it was generous. Most domestic positions paid half that amount. Yes, that's very fair," she managed. Quinn made a note in the ledger. "Pays every 2 weeks. First payment will be next Friday." He closed the book and studied her for a moment. "You're doing fine work, Miss Vale. We're fortunate to have you." That night, Theresa counted her meager savings. With Quinn's wages, she could afford a ticket east within 2 months, perhaps find work in Denver or even return to Pennsylvania. The thought should have comforted her, but instead, she felt an unexpected twinge of regret at the idea of leaving the Silver Spur. Days turned into weeks as Theresa settled into life at the ranch. She took pride in keeping the house in order, cooking hearty meals, and even helping with butter churning and preserving food for the coming winter. The men treated her with respect, and Quinn, though often busy with ranch work, was unfailingly polite and appreciative of her efforts. One evening, about a month after her arrival, a sudden storm blew in from the mountains. Wind howled around the house as rain lashed against the windows. Theresa was just finishing the dinner dishes when Quinn burst through the door, soaked to the skin. "Creek's rising fast," he said, reaching for a slicker hanging by the door. "Need to move the cattle to higher ground." "In this weather?" Theresa asked, alarmed by the intensity of the storm. "No choice," he replied grimly. "Lose the herd, lose the ranch." He turned to leave but paused when Theresa spoke again. "Wait," she said, hurrying to the stove. "At least take some hot coffee with you." She filled a large thermos and pressed it into his hands. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment, their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them before Quinn nodded thanks and disappeared back into the storm. Worried, Theresa paced the house as the hours crawled by. The rain continued unabated, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the darkness outside. It was well past midnight when she heard horses in the yard. Looking out the window, she saw Quinn, Hank, and the others returning, slumped in their saddles with exhaustion. Without thinking, she stoked the fire, put coffee on to boil, and began warming the stew she had saved from dinner. When the men trudged in, dripping water onto the floor, she met them with towels and hot drinks. "Did you save the cattle?" she asked as Quinn sank into a chair at the kitchen table. He nodded, his face drawn with fatigue. "Most of them. Lost a few to the flash flood, but could have been much worse." He accepted the bowl of stew she placed before him. "You didn't have to wait up." "I couldn't sleep knowing you were out in this," she admitted. Quinn looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Thank you," he said simply. In the days that followed, Theresa noticed a subtle shift in their interactions. Quinn began joining her in the kitchen in the evenings after the other men had retired, sometimes helping with simple tasks, other times just sitting quietly with a cup of coffee while she finished her work. They talked about books they had read, about the ranch's history, about the changing seasons. Never about their pasts. One afternoon in late October, Theresa was hanging laundry on the line when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Quinn riding in, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a chestnut coat. "Got some business in town," he said, dismounting. "Thought you might like to come along. You haven't left the ranch since you arrived." Theresa hesitated. The idea of returning to Salida filled her with unease. "I have bread rising," she said, gesturing toward the house. "It can wait," Quinn replied. "Fresh air and a change of scenery would do you good. Besides, thought you might want to pick out some fabric. Noticed your dresses are getting worn." His observation, though accurate, made Theresa self-conscious. She had been carefully mending her 2 dresses, knowing she couldn't afford replacements yet. "I can't accept," she began. "It's not charity," Quinn interrupted gently. "It's an advance on your wages. You've more than earned it." An hour later, they rode into Salida together. The town had grown even in the short time since Theresa had left it, with new buildings rising along the main street. At the general store, Quinn tended to his business while Theresa selected fabric, a practical blue cotton for everyday, and after Quinn's insistence, a lovely green wool for cooler weather. As they left the store, a woman's voice called out sharply, "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Vale." Or should I say Miss Vale now? Theresa turned to see Mrs. Peterson, the hotel owner's wife, approaching with another woman in tow. Both wore expressions of barely concealed curiosity mingled with judgment. "Mrs. Peterson," Theresa acknowledged with a stiff nod. "We heard you'd found employment out at the McAlister Ranch," Mrs. Peterson said, her tone making the statement sound improper. "Quite fortunate for you, considering your circumstances. Before Theresa could respond, Quinn stepped beside her. "Miss Vale has been an invaluable addition to the Silver Spur," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "We're fortunate she accepted the position." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened slightly at his tone. "Yes, well, good day to you both." She hurried away, her companion following close behind. "Don't give them another thought," Quinn said as they walked toward the livery stable. "Small towns run on gossip. They think I'm your—" Theresa couldn't finish the sentence. "What they think doesn't matter," Quinn replied firmly. "We know the truth." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence. As the mountains rose before them, painted gold and crimson with autumn colors, Theresa realized she felt more at peace than she had in years. The Silver Spur had become something she hadn't expected, a sanctuary. That evening, as Quinn helped her carry in firewood for the stove, he mentioned casually, "First snow will be coming soon. Winters get hard up here." "I've been meaning to speak with you about that," Theresa said, setting down her armload of logs. "I've saved nearly enough for a ticket to Denver. I thought perhaps before the mountain passes close." She trailed off, surprised by how difficult the words were to say. Quinn's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. "Of course," he said after a moment. "You never intended to stay permanently." "It's just that," Theresa began, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. That she had planned to leave. That she was no longer certain. That something about this place, about him, made her question her carefully laid plans. "You don't owe me explanations, Miss Vale," Quinn said quietly. "You're free to go whenever you choose." He excused himself and went outside, leaving Theresa standing alone in the kitchen, a hollow feeling growing in her chest. November arrived with bitter winds and the first dusting of snow. Theresa threw herself into her work, sewing new dresses from the fabric Quinn had bought her and preparing the house for winter. Quinn was often away from dawn until dusk, working with the men to ensure the ranch would weather the coming season. When they did cross paths, their conversations were polite but brief, the easy companionship of before replaced by an awkward distance. One evening, as Theresa sat by the fire mending one of Quinn's shirts, a knock came at the door. Opening it, she found herself face to face with a well-dressed stranger whose expensive coat and polished boots marked him as a city man. "Good evening," he said, removing his hat. "I'm looking for Quinn McAlister." "He's out checking the herd," Theresa replied. "Expected back shortly." "Would you like to come in and wait?" The man introduced himself as William Garrett, a lawyer from Denver. As Theresa served him coffee, he explained he was handling the estate of a rancher named James Prescott, who had died the previous month. "Mr. Prescott owned the water rights to Cottonwood Creek," Garrett explained. "I'm here to discuss the transfer of those rights with Mr. McAlister." Theresa frowned, recognizing the name of the creek that ran through the Silver Spur property. "The creek is on this land." "Yes, but the water rights were sold years ago," Garrett said. "Mr. Prescott held them for the past decade. His heir is offering to sell them back to Mr. McAlister for a reasonable sum." When Quinn returned an hour later, his expression darkened at the sight of Garrett. The two men retired to the study, their voices occasionally rising enough for Theresa to catch fragments of heated conversation. When Garrett finally left, Quinn remained in the study, the door firmly closed. Later that night, unable to sleep, Theresa went to the kitchen for a cup of tea. She was surprised to find Quinn sitting at the table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey before him. "I thought you had gone to bed," she said softly. Quinn looked up, his eyes troubled. "Couldn't sleep." Theresa sat across from him. "Is everything all right with the water rights?" "Prescott's son wants $5,000, Quinn said, his voice rough. "Money I don't have. Without those rights, I can't water the herd next summer, can't irrigate the fields." He took another drink. Could lose everything. The defeat in his voice touched something deep inside Theresa. This man who had offered her work and asked nothing in return, who had shown her kindness when she needed it most, was now facing his own crisis. "There must be some solution," she said. "A loan, perhaps, or a payment plan." Quinn shook his head. "Banks won't lend against a property that might lose its water, and Prescott's son isn't interested in payments. He wants cash now to fund some business venture in San Francisco." He sighed heavily. "I built this place from nothing. Seems I might return to nothing." Without thinking, Theresa reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You won't lose the Silver Spur," she said with conviction. "We'll find a way." Quinn looked at their joined hands, then at her face. "We?" he asked quietly. Theresa realized what she had said and that she meant it. Somewhere along the way, the ranch's problems had become her problems. Quinn's concerns had become her concerns. "Yes," she said softly. "We." The following weeks brought heavy snow that blanketed the ranch in white. Isolated by weather, the residents of the Silver Spur turned inward, finding comfort in routine and each other's company. Theresa continued to put aside money from her wages, but no longer for a ticket to Denver. Instead, she began thinking of ways to increase the ranch's income. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, a habit that had resumed following their late-night conversation, Theresa broached the subject. "Have you considered taking on boarders?" she asked. "The railroad brings people through Salida regularly now, and the hotel in town is often full." Quinn looked thoughtful. "Never thought of it. The house has rooms, certainly, with the upstairs bedrooms empty. With the right furnishings, we could offer proper accommodations," Theresa continued, warming to her idea. "Particularly for those traveling to the hot springs at Mount Princeton. They're becoming quite popular for their healing properties." "We?" Quinn asked, echoing their earlier conversation, though this time there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. Theresa felt her cheeks warm. "If you'd like me to stay and help, that is." "I would like that very much," Quinn said quietly. The next morning, they rode into town together to visit the bank. Though the banker was initially skeptical of their boarding house plan, Quinn's reputation for honesty and hard work eventually secured them a modest loan, not enough to buy the water rights, but enough to convert the upstairs rooms into proper accommodations for paying guests. Over the next month, the Silver Spur underwent a transformation. Unused furniture was brought down from the attic, bedrooms were cleaned and painted, and Theresa sewed curtains and bedspreads from fabric ordered from Denver. Quinn built additional shelving and repaired anything that needed fixing, while Hank and the ranch hands helped with the heavier work when weather kept them from their usual duties. Word spread about their venture, and by mid-December, they received their first reservation, a family traveling from St. Louis to spend Christmas with relatives in Gunnison. They would stay 3 nights at the Silver Spur while waiting for the stage to resume after a winter storm. The evening before the guests were to arrive, Theresa stood in the front parlor, surveying their work with satisfaction. Fresh pine boughs decorated the mantel, and candles cast a warm glow over the polished furniture. "It looks like a real home now," Quinn said from the doorway, his voice soft with appreciation. Theresa turned to him, suddenly aware of how much had changed since she had first arrived at the Silver Spur. Not just the house, but herself as well. She was no longer the desperate, abandoned woman seeking temporary shelter, but a partner in building something meaningful. "It is a home," she said. "At least, it has become one to me." Quinn crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his gray eyes. "When you first came here, you said this arrangement was temporary, that you'd stay until you could move on. He paused, his expression serious. Are you still planning to leave, Theresa? It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a flutter through her chest. No, she answered honestly. I don't want to leave. Something in Quinn's face softened. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he raised a hand to her cheek. I'm glad, he said simply, because I don't want you to go. Their first kiss was gentle, a question rather than a demand. When Theresa responded, sliding her arms around his neck, Quinn pulled her closer, deepening the kiss with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. I've wanted to do that for months, Quinn admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Why didn't you? Theresa asked. Because you needed work, not courtship, he answered. Because you deserved time to heal from what your husband did. Because I wanted you to choose to stay, not feel obligated. His consideration, so different from John's selfishness, touched Theresa deeply. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me time to find myself again. Their first guests arrived the following day, the Lawrence family, consisting of a merchant, his wife, and their 2 young daughters. They were delighted with their accommodations and Theresa's cooking, and especially grateful for the warm welcome after their difficult journey through the snow. This is far nicer than we expected, Mrs. Lawrence commented over dinner. When we heard about a boarding house at a cattle ranch, I imagined something quite rustic. All Theresa's doing, Quinn said with obvious pride. She's transformed the place. You make a fine couple, Mr. Lawrence observed. How long have you been married? The question caught them both by surprise. Theresa felt her cheeks flush as Quinn cleared his throat. We're not married, he explained. Miss Vale is my housekeeper. The designation seemed inadequate now, hanging awkwardly in the air between them. Mrs. Lawrence looked embarrassed. Oh, I do apologize, I just assumed. Later that night, after the Lawrences had retired to their rooms, Theresa found Quinn in the study staring into the fire. I'm sorry about the misunderstanding at dinner, she said. Quinn turned to look at her. Are you sorry, I mean? Theresa considered the question. No, she answered honestly. I'm not sorry they thought we were married. I'm only sorry that we had to correct them. Quinn crossed the room to stand before her. Taking her hands in his, he asked quietly, What are we doing, Theresa? What is this between us? I think, she said carefully, that we're falling in love. The words, once spoken, seemed to hang in the air between them, true and terrifying in equal measure. Quinn's hands tightened around hers. I know I am, he said. Have been for months now. But I didn't want to pressure you, especially after what happened with your husband. John and I were never in love, Theresa confessed. We married because it was expected, because I was 20 and afraid of becoming a spinster, because he was charming and promised adventure. She sighed. I didn't know what love was supposed to feel like until, Quinn prompted gently when she hesitated. Until I came here, she finished. Until you. Quinn drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious. I want to court you properly, Theresa Vale. No more pretending you're just my housekeeper. I'd like that, she whispered against his chest. Christmas came, bringing with it more guests to the Silver Spur. Word had spread about the comfortable accommodations and excellent food, and by the end of December, they had hosted 3 more families. The income, while modest, was steady, and Quinn was able to make the first payment toward the water rights. As winter settled fully over the ranch, Quinn began courting Theresa in earnest. He brought her wildflowers he found preserved under the snow, read to her in the evenings by the fire, and on clear nights, took her stargazing, wrapping her in blankets and pointing out constellations in the vast Colorado sky. In turn, Theresa flourished under his attention. She laughed more easily, spoke more confidently, and began to share dreams she had long kept hidden of perhaps someday opening a proper restaurant, of learning to ride and helping with the cattle, of planting an orchard on the south-facing slope near the house. "You plan to be here a long time," Quinn observed one evening as they discussed where apple trees might thrive. "I hope to be," she answered, meeting his gaze steadily. February brought a thaw and with it, unexpected visitors. Theresa was preparing lunch when she heard horses in the yard. Looking out the window, she froze at the sight of a familiar figure dismounting John Vale, her husband, accompanied by two rough-looking men. Quinn was in the barn with Hank, unaware of the arrival. Theresa's heart hammered in her chest as footsteps approached the door, followed by a sharp knock. When she opened it, John's smirk was just as she remembered. "Hello, Theresa," he said, as if he'd been gone a day rather than months. "Aren't you going to invite your husband in?" "You're not welcome here, John," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He pushed past her into the house, his companions following. "Heard you've done well for yourself. Nice place." His eyes swept the room, assessing. "Also heard the owner's sitting on a valuable property. Thought I might come see for myself." "Get out," Theresa demanded. "You abandoned me." "You have no right to be here," John laughed. "Abandoned? I went to seek better opportunities, dear wife, and now I've returned for you." His expression hardened. "And to claim what's mine by right." "There's nothing of yours here," Theresa said. "You're my wife," John replied coldly. "By law, your earnings are mine, and I hear you've been earning quite well as McAlister's housekeeper." The insinuation in his tone was unmistakable. Before Theresa could respond, the door opened and Quinn entered, followed by Hank. Quinn assessed the situation quickly, his expression darkening when he saw John. "You must be Vale," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You're not welcome on my property." John smirked. "I've come for my wife. She'll be leaving with me." "Theresa isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go," Quinn replied. He looked at her. "Is this what you want, Theresa, to go with him?" "No," she said firmly. "Never." John's face contorted with anger. "She doesn't have a choice. She's my wife." "A wife you abandoned," Quinn countered. "Left stranded without money or resources. In some jurisdictions, that's grounds for divorce." "We're not in some jurisdictions," John sneered. "We're in Colorado territory, and here a man has rights to his wife." Quinn stepped forward. "And here at the Silver Spur, I have rights to decide who stays on my land. You're leaving. Now." For a tense moment, it seemed John might resist. His companions shifted, hands moving toward weapons hidden beneath their coats. But Hank had quietly positioned himself near the rifle kept above the door, and John, noting this, finally backed down. "This isn't over," he warned. "I'll be back with the law." After they departed, Theresa sank into a chair, shaking. "He'll come back," she said, knowing John's stubbornness. "Not because he wants me, but because he thinks there's money to be had." Quinn knelt before her, taking her hands. "We'll handle this," he promised. "Together." The next day they rode into Salida to speak with the territorial judge who happened to be holding court that week. Judge Harrison, a stern man with keen eyes, listened carefully to their situation. "Abandonment is serious," he acknowledged, "but divorce is not easily granted without significant cause or mutual consent." "He left me with nothing," Theresa explained. "Not a word for months." The judge considered this. "Do you have any proof of abandonment? A letter, perhaps?" Theresa's heart sank. John's goodbye had been scribbled on a note she had crumpled and thrown away in her despair. "I was there when she arrived in Salida," Quinn offered. "Saw her stranded at the stage stop. Half the town knows her husband ran off with another woman." Judge Harrison sighed. "Hearsay and gossip aren't sufficient for legal proceedings, Mr. McAlister." He paused, thinking. "However, there is another approach." Colorado Territory recently passed a law allowing a woman to file for divorce if her husband has been absent for 1 full year. But it hasn't been a year, Theresa said, disappointment evident in her voice. No, the judge agreed. But the law also provides protections for a woman whose husband has abandoned her. He cannot force your return, nor can he claim your earnings during the period of abandonment. If he attempts to remove you against your will, that would be a criminal matter. It wasn't the solution they had hoped for, but it offered some protection. As they rode back to the ranch, Quinn was thoughtful. "We'll need to be cautious," he said. "John doesn't strike me as a man who respects the law when it doesn't suit him." His concern proved warranted. 3 days later, John returned with the sheriff of a neighboring county who hadn't been fully informed of the situation. "I'm here to escort Mrs. Vale back to her husband," the sheriff announced when Quinn met them in the yard. "That won't be necessary," came a voice from behind them. They turned to see Sheriff Matthews of Salida riding up, accompanied by Judge Harrison. "Mrs. Vale is under the protection of the territorial court," Matthews continued. "Judge Harrison has issued an order preventing her removal against her will." John's face contorted with rage. "She's my wife." "A wife you abandoned," Judge Harrison said sternly. "The court recognizes her right to remain where she chooses until a formal divorce hearing can be arranged. In the meantime, you are ordered to stay at least 100 yards from Mrs. Vale at all times." With the law clearly against him, John had no choice but to leave, though his parting glare at Theresa promised this wasn't the end. That evening, as they sat together in the parlor, Theresa voiced her fears. "He won't give up easily. John has always taken what he wanted, regardless of who it hurt." Quinn took her hand. "I won't let him harm you, Theresa, but I can't help wondering if I'm being selfish asking you to stay. Perhaps it would be safer for you elsewhere until the divorce is final." "Are you asking me to leave?" she asked, her heart constricting. "Never," Quinn said fiercely. "But I need to know you're staying because you want to, not because you feel trapped by circumstances." Theresa moved closer to him on the sofa. "I'm staying because this is where I want to be. With you." Quinn's arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her against him. "When this is resolved," he said softly, "when you're truly free, I want to ask you something important." Theresa looked up at him, hope rising in her chest. "You could ask me now," he smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Some questions deserve to be asked without shadows hanging over the answer. Spring arrived, bringing with it new life to the ranch. The boarding house continued to prosper, with regular guests now including travelers, businessmen from Denver, and families visiting the nearby hot springs. With the additional income, Quinn was able to make steady payments toward securing the water rights, now less than $2,000 from full ownership. Theresa had fully embraced her role at the Silver Spur, not just as housekeeper and cook, but as Quinn's partner in running both the boarding house and aspects of the ranch. She had learned to ride, helped with the spring calving, and even begun keeping the ranch's books, discovering she had a talent for numbers that surprised even herself. One afternoon in early May, Quinn found her in the garden, planting the vegetables that would feed them through the summer and fall. "I've been thinking," he said, kneeling beside her to help with the seedlings, "about expanding the boarding house operation." Theresa looked up, intrigued. "In what way?" "The old bunkhouse near the creek, it's been empty since we built the new one closer to the barn. With some work, it could be converted into a small cottage for guests wanting more privacy. Families with children, perhaps." "That's a wonderful idea," Theresa agreed. "We've had to turn away larger groups because we didn't have enough connected rooms." Quinn nodded. "I was also thinking we might offer guided trips into the mountains, fishing, hunting for those interested." Hank knows these hills better than anyone he could lead expeditions. As they discussed possibilities, making plans for a future they both clearly saw themselves sharing, Theresa felt a contentment she had never known before. This was what partnership should be: two people building something together, each contributing their strengths, supporting the other's dreams. The peaceful afternoon was interrupted by the arrival of a rider, Sheriff Matthews from Salida, his expression grave. "McAlister," he called as Quinn rose to greet him. "Thought you should know John Vale was seen in town yesterday, drinking heavily and making threats." Theresa felt a chill despite the warm spring day. "What kind of threats?" "Said he was going to settle scores," Matthews replied. "I locked him up for the night to sober him up, but had to release him this morning. No crime in running your mouth." He looked at Quinn. "Just thought you should be warned. He had two rough characters with him, same ones as before." After the sheriff departed, Quinn was quiet, his expression troubled. "Perhaps we should stay in town for a few days," he suggested. "At least until we know what John is planning." Theresa shook her head firmly. "This is our home. I won't be driven from it by his threats." Quinn studied her face, pride mingling with concern in his eyes. "Then we'll be vigilant. Hank and the boys will take turns keeping watch, and I want you to carry this." He removed a small derringer from his pocket. "It was my mother's. I hope you never need it, but I'd feel better knowing you can protect yourself." That night, Theresa found sleep elusive. She lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the house settling, the soft footsteps of whoever was on watch pacing the porch. When dawn finally came, she rose, exhausted but determined not to let fear dictate her day. She was kneading bread dough when Quinn entered the kitchen, his expression serious. "Riders coming," he said. "3 of them." Theresa wiped flour from her hands, her heart racing. "John," Quinn nodded grimly. "Stay inside. Hank and the boys are positioned around the house." The confrontation that followed was brief, but intense. John and his companions rode into the yard, openly carrying rifles, a clear violation of the judge's order to stay away from Theresa. "Come out and face me, McAlister," John shouted from horseback. "You've taken what's mine, and I mean to have it back." Quinn stepped onto the porch, unarmed but resolute. "You need to leave Vale. You're in violation of a court order." John laughed harshly. "Court orders don't mean much out here, do they? Man has to stand up for what's his." He raised his rifle. "I'll give you one chance. Send Theresa out now, and maybe you walk away from this." "She's not yours to claim," Quinn replied steadily. "Never was." What happened next unfolded in seconds that seemed to stretch into eternity. John's finger tightened on the trigger as he aimed at Quinn. Theresa, watching from the window, cried out in warning. At the same moment, shots rang out from the barn where Hank was positioned, and from behind the corral where Miguel had taken cover. John's horse reared in panic, throwing him to the ground. His companions, seeing the odds had turned against them, wheeled their mounts and fled, leaving John sprawled in the dirt, clutching his shoulder where Hank's bullet had struck him. Sheriff Matthews, who had been following John and his men at a distance, arrived moments later to find Quinn binding John's wound while Theresa stood guard with her derringer, ensuring he made no further threats. "Seems like justice found you, Vale," the sheriff observed as he handcuffed the injured man. "Attempted murder carries a heavy sentence in the territory." As John was led away, his venomous glare fixed on Theresa. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes," she replied calmly, "it is." In the days that followed, the ranch slowly returned to normal. John was held in the Salida jail awaiting trial, his companions long fled from the territory. Judge Harrison, informed of the incident, expedited Theresa's petition for divorce. citing John's violent actions as more than sufficient grounds. On a warm June morning, exactly 1 year after Theresa had arrived at the Silver Spur, she stood before the judge in Salida and was declared legally free from her marriage to John Vale. The proceeding was brief, John's absence noted as he awaited transfer to the territorial prison to serve his sentence for attempted murder. Quinn waited outside the courthouse, and when Theresa emerged, her eyes bright with unshed tears of relief, he took her hands in his. "Theresa Vale," he said softly. "Or perhaps you'd prefer another name now." "I would," she answered, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "I've worn a name that never truly belonged to me for too long." Quinn led her to a small garden behind the courthouse where spring flowers bloomed in riotous color. There, beneath an archway covered in climbing roses, he knelt before her. "I promised myself I would wait until you were truly free," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I've loved you since that first night you cooked dinner for us, not because of the meal, though it was delicious, but because of the dignity and grace you showed in the face of adversity." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "Theresa, will you marry me? Will you continue building our life together, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife and partner in all things?" Tears spilled onto Theresa's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose and took her in his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and a future filled with hope. They were married 2 weeks later in the parlor of the Silver Spur, surrounded by friends they had made during their year together. Judge Harrison officiated, Hank served as Quinn's best man, and Mrs. Lawrence, who had been their first boarding house guest and had returned specifically for the occasion, stood with Theresa. As summer ripened into fall, the Silver Spur flourished. The boarding house expanded as planned, with the converted bunkhouse proving particularly popular with families. Quinn secured the water rights to Cottonwood Creek, ensuring the ranch's prosperity for generations to come. And Theresa, now Theresa McAlister, found herself experiencing a joy she had once thought impossible. On a crisp October evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Theresa rested her head on Quinn's shoulder. "I was thinking about the day we met," she said softly. "How desperate I was, how alone." Quinn's arm tightened around her. "I remember thinking you were the proudest woman I'd ever seen, standing there with nothing but still refusing to accept charity." Theresa smiled at the memory. "You were clever about that, offering me work instead." "Best decision I ever made," Quinn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I never expected to fall in love with my housekeeper." "And I never expected to fall in love with my employer," Theresa replied with a laugh. "Especially after swearing I'd never depend on a man again." Quinn turned to face her, his expression serious. "You don't depend on me, Theresa. We depend on each other. That's what makes this work. We're equals in this life we've built." As darkness fell, they remained on the porch, planning the spring planting, discussing the cattle they would purchase with the profits from the boarding house, and dreaming of children who might someday run across the fields of the Silver Spur. When Theresa finally rose to go inside, Quinn caught her hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" she asked. "For staying. For believing in this place in us when you could have gone anywhere." Theresa smiled, the love in her heart reflecting in her eyes. "Thank you for giving me work when I needed it most and asking nothing in return." Hand in hand, they walked into the house that had become their home, their future stretching before them like the vast Colorado sky, boundless with possibility and bright with promise. 5 years later, Theresa stood on the porch of the Silver Spur, watching as Quinn taught their 3-year-old son Thomas to ride his first pony. Their daughter Eleanor, just a year old, babbled happily in her arms, reaching out toward her father and brother with tiny hands. The ranch had grown considerably now, encompassing twice the original acreage, with a herd of prime cattle that commanded top prices at market. The boarding house had evolved into a proper inn, with a reputation that brought guests from as far away as New York and San Francisco. As Quinn lifted Thomas from the pony and swung him high in the air, their son's laughter echoed across the yard. Theresa smiled, thinking of how far they had come from that first day when a desperate woman with nothing had met a cowboy who offered work and expected nothing in return. Love, she had learned, wasn't found in grand gestures or flowery promises. It was built day by day, in moments of kindness, in shared work and shared dreams, in the courage to begin again when life left you stranded. As Quinn approached with Thomas on his shoulders, his smile as warm and true as it had been on the day they met, Theresa knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a home, but a love that would last a lifetime.